A warship so advanced, it shouldn't even exist yet. The energy pulse hit the target hull, but nothing happened. Senior Surveyor Malin leaned over his terminal on the primary deck, his four-jointed fingers adjusting the power lines. No light flared, no metal tore, no system failed. The unshielded human vessel just drifted inside the heavy magnetic clamp, its dark metal skin swallowing the blue discharge completely. Malin cleared the static columns from his screen, waiting for the structural breakdown report, but the terminal stayed flat. The disruption wave did not ground out Overseer, Malin said, turning his head toward the central platform. The hull grid did not break. The ship is still drawing a baseline current. Overseer Razul did not answer immediately. He stood with his arms folded across his thick tactical mesh, his eyes locked on the narrow viewshield. The command deck of the Dread Sovereign 9 smelled of pressurized hydrogen and the bitter fluid used to cool the secondary sensor relays. For 8,000 cycles, the Karkari Dominion had used this exact method to clean the perimeter line. They found an unregistered craft, issued a brief warning, and used an electronic pulse to fry the internal networks. It was a standard procedure that usually took less than 2 minutes. Would you have fired on that quiet ship, or would you have waited, listened to what happened to those who fired? Exactly 40 minutes before the scanners fractured, the sector line was clear. The Dominion flagship had detected a tiny hull, barely 190 meters long, moving without an active engine trail. According to the Imperial database, verified exactly 39 cycles ago during the border surveys, the vessel belonged to humanity. The file described Terran ships as simple chemical thrust platforms that used basic metal plates and primitive projectile barrels. They were catalogued as a low-tier colony species, too slow to present a tactical risk. Razul tapped a control key, transmitting the standard corporate annexation script on an open frequency. Your platform has been marked for structural demolition. His voice boomed through the transmitter. You have 18 focus locks set on your primary holds. Evacuate your crew within the next few paragraphs or undergo processing. Inside the small human ship, designated the UNS Resolution, the warning text scrolled across a pair of secondary glass displays. Commander Arthur Pendleton did not stand up from his metal workbench. He wore a grease-stained wool watch cap pulled low over his forehead, his rough hands steady as he placed an adjusted steel wrench around a leaky pipe joint. He tightened the brass packing nut, wiped a stray drop of moisture with a greasy rag, and then reached for a heavy mug of roasted barley water. He took a slow drag from the lukewarm drink, his eyes staying on the wrench. The alien flagship is charging its forward projector arrays, Commander, Lieutenant Valeria Sterling said from the seat behind him. She did not raise her voice. She had spent 11 cycles monitoring boundary line friction in the outer sectors, and her fingers moved through the sub-frequency loops with total familiarity. They are trying to run a high-yield grid wipe. The automated dampeners have already blocked their tractor beam. Pendleton set the mug down on the edge of the workbench. Let them throw the wave, Lieutenant. It saves us the trouble of cycling the secondary converters. Is the hold secure? Deep in the lower section of the vessel, lead fabricator Jonas Vance checked the containment housing manually. The core is sitting steady at 3% idle, Vance called up through the internal comms line. The field is clean. The singularity is just humming down here like a sleeping bird. On the Dominion bridge, Razul watched the countdown timer hit the mark. The human ship had not lowered its hull shields, and no escape pods had launched from its sides. They are choosing conversion, Razul said, gesturing to the weapons team. Discharge the main disruption wave, burn their life support nets, and send the automated boarding skiffs to clear the deck. The forward arrays of the flagship flashed, sending a massive blue wave of coherent energy across the short distance between the two vessels. It was a charge designed to short-circuit planetary power systems. Malin watched the telemetry line hit the human skin. He expected to see the target's electronics die in real time, but the white sensor bars on his station suddenly began to vibrate. A low, heavy hum vibrated through the deck plates of the Dread Sovereign 9. It was not a mechanical rattle from their own engines, but a physical pulse that seemed to live inside the structural steel itself. Malin's tracking columns turned from green to a dark, flashing violet. The terminal did not display an error code. It began to calculate numbers that broke his baseline formulas. Overseer Malin said, his fingers hitting the reset switches twice as the glass grew hot beneath his hand. The target's mass signature is shifting. It is expanding exponentially without any physical growth. The sensors are registering 12,000 metric tons of displacement, now 85,000. The ship is drawing our entire weapon output directly into its secondary core. Razul stepped down from the platform, his heavy boots clicking on the floor as he approached Malin's station. That is a scanning error. A hull of that size cannot support an internal grid with those metrics. Rekey the focus locks and prepare the rail barrels. The locks are gone, Malin reported, his voice losing its formal bureaucratic flatness. The tracking grids are completely blind. The light is bending around their hull plates. Outside the viewshield, the dark armor of the UNS Resolution began to mechanically slide backward. Rows of geometric projector matrices emerged from the inner framework, glowing with a pale, silent violet light. The small ship did not accelerate, and its thruster ports stayed dark. It sat perfectly still inside a pocket of spacetime that was beginning to ripple. Humanity had not spent the last 39 cycles building the chemical rockets described in the Imperial database. They had spent 28 winters inside the dense dust belts of the outer rim, working in absolute silence to construct an entirely separate class of physical systems. They had built Project Horizon Vanguard. Pendleton stood up from his workbench, pulling his uniform coat over his wool sweater. He walked to the center of the small bridge, his boots making a dull thud against the floor. Lieutenant Sterling, bring the primary displacement grid online. Let our friends see what we are actually flying. Sterling keyed the main override. The 4 Hertz vibration in the hold stabilized, turning into a silent force that reached out across the void. The human ship did not fire a single plasma torpedo or a kinetic rail slug. It simply altered the local space metric exactly 2 meters ahead of the alien flagship's heavy drive clusters. On the Dominion bridge, the floor suddenly tilted. Malin was thrown violently against his terminal, his arm cracking against the edge of the obsidian glass frame as an irresistible gravity load pulled the entire 3,000-meter dreadnought forward. The primary structural beams of the flagship groaned under a sudden weight of 450 gs. The steel buckled, the glass cracked, the power died. The primary system displays on the dread Sovereign 9 went completely black. Emergency batteries kicked in, casting a faint red glow through the smoke that was rising from the short-circuited terminal stations. Razul fell to his knees on the tilted deck, his hands grasping at the floor plates as the physical pressure of the gravity well compressed his chest. Through the front view shield, he looked up at the human ship. The tiny craft sat unmoved, its violet panels casting long, steady shadows through the distorted light of the sector. The Dominion's ancient military doctrine, built across thousands of cycles of star system conquests, had been dismantled without a single shot being fired. They were not looking at a primitive colony scout. They were looking at a weapon that should not exist for another 3 millennia. The pressure stabilized as the human ship opened its displacement grip, releasing the broken flagship from the localized warp field. The dread Sovereign 9 drifted dead in the dark, its heavy drive systems burned out down to the central couplings. Malin dragged himself back up to his fractured terminal, his station running on a minimal emergency loop. He pulled up the old survey file from 39 cycles ago, looking at the printed description of primitive chemical thrusters, then looked up at the violet shadow ahead. The human ship did not issue a counterdemand. They did not plead. They did not threaten. They simply left. The projector matrices on the small craft flared once, cutting a clean, silent space fold directly through the center of the sector line. The vessel slipped through the tier without leaving a single trace of engine radiation or thermal waste, leaving behind a deck full of wounded witnesses who knew their dominance had ended. Malin reached out and cleared his damaged tracking screen, his fingers wet with cooling fluid. The primary monitor displayed a single green status bar that ran across the center of the dark glass, showing 0 active signatures within the sector perimeter. A single adjusted steel wrench sat motionless on the human deck logs, preserved in the final telemetry scan before the grid went cold.